Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at the Prague European Summit. My name is Danielle Piatkiewicz, and I am a research fellow for EUROPEUM Institute of European Policy. I'm delighted to speak with Dr. Danielle Hamilton to discuss today's session entitled Transatlantic Relations Beyond Repair, What to Expect from the US 2020 Presidential Elections. Dr. Hamilton is an Austrian Marshall Plan Foundation professor and formerly executive director of the Center for Transatlantic Relations. Previously, Dr. Hamilton was a Richard von Weizsäcker professor at Johns Hopkins SAIS, a fellow at the Robert Bosch Academy in Berlin, diplomatic fellow in the German Foreign Office, and executive director at the American Consortium on European Union Studies, among many other prestigious positions, Dr. Hamilton. Today, we are here to dive into the latest developments of the US 2020 presidential elections and get your take on its impact on the US-EU relations, as well as relations in regards with Central and Eastern Europe. Dr. Hamilton, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. I say hello to all my friends in the Czech Republic.
Thank you. I'll start off by asking you if you can give us your take on the ongoing developments in the United States after the elections. Are you surprised by the turn of events and President Trump's reactions? And how do you think this will play out?
I think it's important to distinguish between the legal process and sort of the political headlines that one is seeing. The legal process is moving forward. The states record their votes formally only in early December. So even under the real procedure, it takes a while. Our system relates to the Electoral College, and those electors also don't record their votes until December. So the process will continue. President Trump has every right to ask for checks on everything, but I don't know anyone, including many of his own advisors, who believes that'll change the final result, that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be lead the next administration in January.
Thank you. So it is certain that the Trump administration will no doubt leave a lasting impression on both the US and the world. How do you see the transition to a Biden administration affect the transatlantic relationship? Do you think it will revert back to the traditional relationship reminiscent to the Obama years? Or will there be some continuation of Trump policies, specifically towards external challengers, such as Russia, China, or Iran?
Well, my friendly caution would be to avoid making what I think is going to happen in Europe is to make two mistakes. The first you can already see right now. There's sort of a collective sigh of relief. Thank God the Americans have come to their senses. Now we can go back to business as usual. I think that's a mistake. There isn't really a going back. The relationship has changed in many different ways. The task for us now is how do we reinvent the transatlantic alliance and partnership to look to the future and a very different set of challenges than we have tended to face in the past. I think that requires a lot of work on our parts, not just what Europeans expect from the United States, but what Europe itself is prepared to do. So there are two critical months right now of transition. I have the sense Europe is waiting for America. I think it should be the opposite. Do your homework, prepare. What is it that Europe is prepared to offer to the United States to reinvent this alliance? That should be a really good use of 2 months right now. I think the second potential mistake is when the Biden administration takes office, it will be confronted by an unbelievable conflation of crises at home. We have the ongoing pandemic. We never left the first wave of the pandemic. It's the worst it has ever been today as I speak. There's no prospect of it getting under control anytime soon, despite the hopeful promise of the vaccine. It's related then to a second crisis of the U.S. economy, which has been, basically in deep depression, despite trying to recover. But it'll never recover until we get a handle on the pandemic. Third, we have a massive social reckoning in the United States that is ongoing because of systemic racism and ongoing inequalities. Both have been brought out by the first two crises. But I believe that social reckoning is what ultimately propelled Joe Biden to the presidency. And he will have to, start to work on that. And then finally, there's a 4-year legacy of Donald Trump and all of what that has meant, and trying to heal the nation after that. That is an incredible set of challenges, which means the administration will have to turn to domestic challenges first. And the danger will be Europe will interpret that as a return to isolationism. I think that's wrong. If Americans can't help themselves, they can't help anybody else. That's got to be the premise of everything. Foreign policy starts at home. And so the challenge for us together is to think of how our common domestic challenges can form a basis for a way to reinvent the alliance. That means working together on distribution of vaccine, for instance. It means thinking of a transatlantic recovery initiative for the economy. It means building down barriers in trade to elements related to the recovery, such as medical equipment, other types of things that we could deal with quickly. It means thinking differently about how we engage with other parts of the world. I think the Biden administration, these are my personal views, will expect far more of Europe, not less of Europe. It will want Europe to step up, not to be a sort of a counterweight to the United States, but to be its counterpart. I think Europe is probably unprepared. That the president-elect has said within 100 days he will host a global climate summit. That's a far faster track than the COP process, the Paris process, which calls for a summit only next fall in the UK. The trick will be, how do we align these two processes? We're about to enter sort of a new type of race, which is who defines the rules of the green economy. There is a Brussels effect, people like to talk about, regulatory rules set by Brussels. There is a California effect that's often set by the state of California, but now will become national policy in the United States. And then there is a Beijing effect of how Beijing is setting norms and standards in lots of areas of the world that we have to think hard about. So there's an opportunity here, but it's also a real challenge. We're also going to face some ongoing issues that continue simply as a legacy of the last few years. We have not got a handle on lots of digital disconnects across the Atlantic. The privacy shield that regulates data flows has been rendered invalid. So what will happen? We have issues about data governance. The digital economy is becoming the economy, and the deepest links in the digital economy are across the Atlantic, of all in the world. So we have to get our act together on that. There's an issue about Iran. How do we come back to the JCPOA in a way that starts to work? I think the administration, again, will have higher standards for that agreement than just the nuclear dimension. It'll include Iran's refusal to recognize Israel, its support for terrorism, its efforts to undermine its neighbors. It's a different playing field that going forward. So there are a host of issues. It's about going forward and rethinking things, not about going back to the past. And my question will be, is Europe ready for that type of ambitious relationship?
Dr. Hamilton, thank you so much for that. I do have a follow-up question to that. So you're talking about Europe, but obviously Europe is a combination of many different states. So what we see is, in the last 2 weeks, when the news agencies called for a Biden administration, a sigh of relief, as you mentioned. However, some countries who had, I would say, strong relations with a Trump administration might not be so keen on that. And I will have to point out Poland and Hungary as like. So when you see that these kind of diverging approaches towards a Biden administration, how do you think that will play into effect with the transition to a Biden?
Well, I mean, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland have all been very important allies for the United States. That goes beyond any administration. But of course, it's always important not to try to, just be partners with one part of the American political spectrum. If it helps, it's important maybe to recall that the Democrats were the ones that got those 3 countries into NATO. And in an interesting sidelight of history, when it came down to the ratification debate in the US Senate about the entry of those countries into NATO, The Republicans had the majority, but they asked a Democrat to manage the debate on the floor of the US Senate because they trusted him so much to have a bipartisan effort, and that was Senator Joe Biden. Joe Biden managed the floor debate for NATO entry to the Czech Republic, Poland, and Hungary. He's had a deep commitment to those countries as our partners and allies. I think that we face a common challenge that's beyond any of the particulars, and that is to reestablish a sense that we are an alliance of values, an alliance with adherence to free institutions and democratic norms. That's faded in recent years, and the United States, frankly, has led that fade. This is not pointing fingers at anyone. It is that we have to look self-reflectively, honestly at ourselves and shore up our own efforts to prevent democratic backsliding within our alliance. That's sort of foundational to everything else we will want to do. Those will be tough conversations, no doubt. But I think it's incumbent upon all of us, if we really believe the principles we say we stand for, we have to look in the mirror and say to ourselves, are we upholding those standards as we should?
Fantastic, thank you. So my last question to you, and this is to address the fundamental question in the session title. Do you think that US relations with Europe can be repaired, or are they irreparably damaged?
No, I think we go through these phases. It's probably helpful to remember, European-American relations always been the history of difference. Simply saying we have differences isn't a case for divorce. It's a case for a bit more effective partnership. And I think we have a new opportunity here to get things on track. As I said, not to go back to something, but to think in a new, fresh way. That's a great opportunity. I would suggest one way to do that, and it's in a good way, is to think about our alliance. NATO needs a new strategic concept. It's the guiding document for the alliance. We need to position NATO for the future, not the past. The last strategic concept was written in 2010. It's way out of date. And here is a good agreed process by which we could move forward. I suggest this alliance of values as a foundational concept for a new strategic concept. We have to update the core tasks NATO performs. And I would add, we should think very hard about a new task for NATO, which I call comprehensive resilience. Most challenges to our societies today are about disruption. It's cyber attacks, it's attacks on infrastructures, it's the pandemic, it's things that simply disrupt how our societies function. That is security, but it's not the kind of security we've been accustomed to thinking about. And yet, all of it is shared resilience because we're so deeply intertwined with each other. That's a huge task, not just for NATO, but for us as an alliance and a partnership, also with the European Union. So I think we should think hard about that as a new task, a new forward-looking way to deal with a challenge that's confronting us every day. And we don't have the tools or even the mindset yet to how to confront that.
Dr. Hamilton, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to the rest of the discussions at the Prague European Summit that will dive deeper into many of the areas that you touched upon today. So thank you so much for your time.
I welcome it, and thank you. Hope you have a good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.